My name is Daniel Whitmore, I'm 63 years old, and until recently, I believed I understood what family meant: loyalty, trust, respect. Those were the words my father repeated to me throughout my life, but the day he died, I discovered something about families that I wish I had learned much earlier. Money doesn't build families, it reveals them. My father, Richard Whitmore, was not a rich man when he started his life. In fact, he began with almost nothing. A pickup truck, a toolbox, and a stubborn determination that most people mistook for pride. Over 40 years, he built Whitmore Construction into a company worth several $1,000,000, but if you asked him what he was most proud of, he never mentioned the money. He always said the same thing: I built something my children will never have to struggle for. At the time, I believed that was true. Now I know better. I was the oldest child. For the past 15 years, I worked beside my father every single day. I knew every employee, every project, every client. When my father got sick, the responsibility of running the company slowly shifted to me. My brother Michael had never shown much interest in the business. He preferred fast deals and easy opportunities. He was the kind of man who always believed the next big payday was just around the corner. My sister Karen lived 2 states away. She visited during holidays, brought expensive wine, and talked about how stressful her life was in the city. But when my father started spending more time in hospitals than in the office, it was just me and him. I drove him to treatments, sat with him during long nights when the pain kept him awake, and 3 months before he died, we had a conversation that I remember word for word. He looked at me from his hospital bed and said, "Daniel, when I'm gone, things might get complicated." I asked him what he meant. He smiled faintly and said, "Don't worry. I've taken care of everything." At the time, I thought he meant the will. I didn't realize how right he was. The reading of the will happened 2 weeks after the funeral. The lawyer's office felt strangely quiet that morning. Michael arrived first. He looked relaxed. Too relaxed for someone who had just lost his father. Karen arrived a few minutes later, already asking questions about selling the family house. That was the first moment I felt something was wrong. The lawyer began reading the document slowly. According to my father's will, all assets were to be divided equally between the 3 of us: the house, the investments, and the company. Everything. At first, that might sound reasonable. But the reality was very different. Michael and Karen had never contributed to the business, not a single day, yet suddenly they owned 2/3 of the company my father and I had spent decades building. I stayed quiet during the meeting, but Michael didn't. The moment the lawyer finished reading the will, he leaned back in his chair and said, "Well, looks like we're all business partners now." The smile on his face told me something else entirely. He wasn't interested in running a business, he was interested in cashing out. It didn't take long for that suspicion to become reality. Just 4 days later, Michael called a meeting. Karen joined us through video call. Michael wasted no time. "I've been talking to a few investors," he said. "We could sell the company and split the money within a month." Karen nodded immediately. "That sounds like the smartest option." They both looked at me, expecting agreement. Instead, I said one word: "No." The silence that followed lasted almost 10 seconds. Michael leaned forward. "Daniel, be realistic. This company is worth millions. Why keep working when we can all walk away rich?" Because to him, money was the finish line, but to me, the company was something else. It was my father's life, his sacrifice, his legacy. "I'm not selling," I said calmly. Michael shrugged. "You don't have a choice. We own the majority." Technically, he was right. 2 votes against 1. The company could be sold without my approval, or so they believed. Over the next few days, things moved quickly. Michael contacted potential buyers. Karen started discussing how she planned to spend her share of the money. I began receiving emails from lawyers and investors asking about company documents. It felt like watching strangers dismantle something I had spent half my life building. But one detail kept bothering me. My father had been extremely careful with everything related to the company, too careful to leave it completely exposed like this. Then I remembered something. About a year before he died, my father had mentioned a business protection agreement. At the time, I didn't ask many questions. Now I wished I had. The next morning, I called his lawyer. when I arrived at the office, the lawyer greeted me with a long, thoughtful look. "Daniel," he said, "I had a feeling you might come." He opened a drawer and removed a sealed envelope. "This document was left with instructions," he explained. "Your father asked me not to reveal it unless the company was at risk of being sold." My heart started beating faster. Inside the envelope was a contract dated 2 years earlier. I read it slowly, then I read it again, because what it said changed everything. The agreement stated that operational control of Whitmore Construction belonged to the person who had actively managed the company for more than 10 consecutive years. Ownership shares could be inherited, but the authority to sell the company required approval from the managing partner. That partner was me. My father had anticipated exactly what might happen, and he had protected the business long before it became a problem. For the first time since his funeral, I smiled. 2 days later, Michael scheduled another meeting. He walked into the office carrying a bottle of champagne. Karen joined through video again. Michael placed several documents on the table. "Good news," he said proudly. "We've got a buyer ready. All we need are signatures." I slowly placed my own folder on the table. "Before we sign anything," I said, "there's something you should read." Michael opened the folder. Karen leaned closer to her screen. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Michael's expression changed. "What is this?" he asked. "It's Dad's business agreement," I replied calmly. He read the second page, then the third. By the time he reached the final paragraph, his hands were shaking. Karen looked confused. "What does it say?" she asked. Michael didn't answer, so I did. "It says the company can't be sold without my approval." Karen stared at the screen. Michael stood up so quickly his chair almost fell over. "You planned this?" he shouted. I shook my head. "No. Dad did." The room fell silent. Then I said something that ended the conversation. "You wanted money. That's fine. You still have your inheritance. But the company stays with the person who actually built it with him." 6 months later, Whitmore Construction signed its largest contract in 20 years. The company is stronger than ever. Michael rarely calls. Karen stopped calling completely, and honestly, I've made peace with that, because the truth is something my father understood long before I did. Money doesn't destroy families, it simply reveals who they truly are, and in the end, I was the one who had the last laugh. For a few seconds after I explained the agreement, no one spoke. Michael stood there staring at the papers like he was trying to find a mistake. Karen's voice finally broke the silence from the screen. "This can't be real." Michael flipped through the pages again. Every clause, every signature, every legal stamp. My father had done everything carefully, too carefully for Michael to find a loophole. Finally, he slammed the papers back onto the table. "You think this is funny?" he said. I looked at him calmly. "No. I think this is exactly what Dad wanted." Michael laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You manipulated him." That accusation didn't even surprise me. It was easier for him to believe that than to accept the truth. Michael had spent most of his life chasing quick money. My father had spent his life building something real. Those two ways of thinking rarely understand each other. Karen finally spoke again. "So what happens now?" I leaned back slightly in my chair. "Now the company continues running exactly the way it has for the past 15 years. Michael shook his head. "You're not serious." "Oh, I am." He leaned forward across the table. "You think we're just going to walk away from millions of dollars?" I gave him a small smile. "You're not walking away from anything. You still inherit the house, the investments, and Dad's personal accounts." Karen frowned. "But that's not nearly as much as selling the company." "That's correct." Michael's voice grew colder. "Then we'll take this to court." That possibility had crossed my mind already, so I answered honestly, "You can try." The lawyer who had prepared the documents was one of the best in the state. My father had chosen him very carefully. The agreement was airtight. Michael knew it. I could see it in his face. Still, he wasn't ready to give up. The following weeks were unpleasant. Michael called almost every day. At first he tried persuasion. "Daniel, think about it. We could all retire tomorrow." Then he tried guilt. "Dad would never want us fighting like this." And eventually, he tried anger. "You're stealing from your own family." But every conversation ended the same way: the company was not for sale. Karen stopped speaking to me completely. Michael's calls became less frequent. Eventually they stopped altogether. For a while, I wondered if maybe that was the end of it. But I underestimated how far Michael was willing to go. 3 months later, I discovered his next move. One of our longtime employees came into my office looking nervous. "Mr. Whitmore," he said quietly, "I thought you should know something." Apparently Michael had been contacting several of our largest clients. He was telling them the company was unstable, that there was a family dispute, that selling the company was inevitable. In other words, he was trying to scare them away. If the company lost enough contracts, its value would drop. Then Michael could argue that selling was the only option left. It was a clever strategy. But it also told me something important. Michael was desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. Instead of confronting him immediately, I did something else. I called the lawyer. Again, when I explained what Michael had been doing, the lawyer simply nodded. "That actually helps us," he said. "How?" He slid another document across the table. Apparently my father had anticipated this possibility as well. The agreement included a clause stating that any shareholder who deliberately harmed the company's business relationships could have their shares bought out at a predetermined price, a price based on the company's value 5 years earlier. At the time my father signed the document, the company had been worth far less. I stared at the paper for a long moment. "Are you saying?" The lawyer smiled slightly. "If we can prove what your brother has been doing, you could legally buy out his shares for a fraction of their current value." Suddenly, the situation looked very different. Gathering proof wasn't difficult. Several clients forwarded the emails Michael had sent. One of them had even recorded a phone call. Within a week, the lawyer had everything he needed. Michael received the legal notice on a Monday morning. I heard about it from Karen. She called me unexpectedly. "What did you do?" she demanded. "I followed the agreement Dad created." "He's going to lose everything." "No," I said calmly. "He's losing the part he tried to destroy." Karen went silent. For the first time, she sounded uncertain. "What happens now?" "Now Michael can either sell his shares under the agreement, or go to court and lose them anyway." The silence on the phone lasted a long time. Then Karen said quietly, "He didn't think you'd fight back." I almost laughed. Neither did I. A week later, Michael finally agreed to meet. He looked very different from the confident man who had walked into the lawyer's office months earlier. Tired, angry, defeated. He sat across from me and said only one sentence: "You win." I shook my head. This was never about winning. Michael looked around the office. The same office our father had worked in for 30 years. "You always were Dad's favorite," he muttered. That comment used to bother me. Now it just made me sad. "He didn't choose favorites," I said. "He chose responsibility." Michael didn't reply. He simply signed the documents. 6 months after that meeting, I officially became the sole owner of Whitmore Construction. The buyout price for Michael's shares was far lower than what he once expected. Karen eventually sold her portion as well. She preferred the certainty of cash over the uncertainty of business. And just like that, the company belonged to me. Sometimes people ask if I regret how everything happened, if I wish things had been different. The honest answer is no, because my father taught me something important long before all of this began. A family isn't defined by blood, it's defined by the people who stand beside you when things are difficult, the employees who helped build the company, the clients who trusted us for decades, the people who believed in the same values my father believed in. That's the family that remained. And in the end, that was worth far more than any inheritance.